Mega Man X is an elegantly designed game. I typically try to avoid using box quote style vocabulary such as immersive or visceral these days, as it feels like most writers just pick a word out of a hat to describe something positively without knowing how to actually describe it. In the case of Mega Man X, however, it feels appropriate. The original Mega Man games relied heavily on the user's trial and error and memorization in order to get through sections of the game and figure out which order to defeat the robot masters in. This memorization was typically tied to very specific aspects of the game and often resulted in incredibly difficult obstacles to try and damn it! Mega Man X took a different approach to this trial and error method. Instead of creating different set pieces in each level to generate difficulty, they adjusted conditions in the environment to either be easier or more challenging based on the player's approach. Capcom not only introduced new mechanics such as the ability to dash, but used the mechanics to funnel the player into an ideal order of play. I believe Capcom's intention is for the player to tackle the robot masters in the order of Chill Penguin, Storm Eagle, Flame Mammoth, Spark Mandrill, Armored Armadillo, Launch Octopus, Boomer Kuwanger, and finally Sting Chameleon. Before we get into that specifically, let's look at some of the environmental effects Capcom took advantage of with the increased capabilities of the Super Nintendo. In the very opening level, you are introduced to enemies that will destroy the ground beneath them. There are also segments of the ground that will crumble and fall once X is crossed over. This could have been included, 1, because it is totally awesome, or 2, to signify that X can no longer turn back on his current choice of action and must be committed to forging ahead. Even if it's a bit of a stretch, I'd like to think it was included for both reasons. This level also introduces the mid-level boss who, upon being destroyed, collapses the road beneath X and drops him into a chasm. This creates a level of cinematic theatricality that wasn't available in previous games, yet the player had to do nothing more than fight as usual. A similar effect can be found in Launch Octopus's stage after defeating the battle boat thing. It sinks beneath the water, destroying an obstacle and grants access to a mechanical serpent guarding a heart tank. A mechanical serpent that seems to be disassembled and destroyed at Flame Mammoth stage. Armored Armadillo stage introduces an interesting sub-boss that doesn't attack the player, but instead destroys the level. If he manages to get too far, the player won't be able to reach a heart tank as their prize. Finally, in Sting Chameleon stage, if you do not defeat the sub-boss of that level, then the cavern below will continue to drop rocks from the ceiling and become a nuisance. Yet 3 of the most significant environmental changes occur based on what order you defeat the robot masters in. If you defeat Launch Octopus first, then Sting Chameleon's level will have water in a hidden area, allowing the player to use the dash and reach the heart tank. More importantly, however, are the changes based on Chill Penguin and Storm Eagle's levels. Completion of each will change Flame Mammoth and Spark Mandrill stages respectively and in significant ways. This is your first hint that the game requires you to defeat Chill Penguin and Storm Eagle first. It goes a bit beyond just environmental changes though. Chill Penguin needs to be the first level completed in order to get the boot upgrade, the only power-up in the game that is not hidden. This makes the dash boots the most important upgrade you will get in Mega Man X. Let's back up a bit though. As I said earlier, Capcom relies on the player to go through trial and error to experiment with the order in which they tackle enemies. So let's give each stage a try without the dash boots and using just the Mega Buster. In the order that I've proposed, this is usually the last boss to be faced, so why not try it first? Without the dash boots, the player cannot get to the sub-boss, which means you can't get the armor upgrade, which also means you can't stop those annoying rocks from falling. Without the helmet, the dash boots, or the completion of Launch Octopus's stage, the heart tank is impossible to get to. This leaves the player with no choice but to go through the cavern, having to dodge all the falling rocks as well as the enemies that drop down from the ceiling. Eventually, we get ourselves an armored vehicle similar to what Vile had just used in the previous stage. Remember, we're trying Sting Chameleon first. But instead of feeling empowered, we have to deal with the difficulty of sinking into the mud. The player is not given that awesome empowered feeling of using the machine that just defeated them moments ago. So finally we get the Sting Chameleon and Finally we get the Sting Chameleon and damn it! Finally we get son of a... Without Boomer Kuwanger's scissors, you can't really break Sting Chameleon of his tactics. Each of his attacks covers a wide area, providing little opportunity for evasion, and deals some major damage without the armor upgrade. You ultimately have to focus on fighting defensively, trying to avoid him rather than finding moments to strike out at him. Defeating him first is probably possible, but highly unlikely and a lot more trouble than it is worth. You're better off waiting until you have the scissors, which drop Sting Chameleon from the ceiling and force him to leap right back into a position of vulnerability. The first thing to notice here is that the floor is electrified in certain parts, shooting bolts of electricity throughout the ground. It's a simple obstacle and only appears at the start of the level, so maybe it's not... oh crap. Now, if you defeat Storm Eagle first, you'll see the wreckage of his plane at the start of the level, and this obstacle won't appear, suggesting that the crashing plane broke the floor. If you use the map view on the stage select screen, you'll even see that Storm Eagle's stage is right next to Spark Mandrill's. This could be intentional, but it could also be coincidental for a reason I'll get to later. The key here is that playing Storm Eagle's stage first will make Spark Mandrill's just a bit easier at the start. However, later on in the level, the lights will start going on and off, temporarily leaving the player in blindness. If you take on Spark Mandrill before Storm Eagle, though, each area will be dimly lit enough for the player to see where they're going. Now, the sub-boss to Spark Mandrill's stage is a piece of cake under 3 conditions. 1, you have the dash boots. 2, you have Storm Eagle's weapon. 3, you have the Mega Buster upgrade. With these 3 upgrades, you can avoid this robot's attacks and inflict some serious damage using the charged up form of Storm Eagle's tornado attack. Without any of these upgrades, it is easier to get stuck in the gooey puddles left on the ground, which then leaves the player vulnerable. It is quite possible that you may never get past this sub-boss and could never make it to Spark Mandrill. In the event that you do, however, the odds are still low that you'll manage to defeat him. Even if you can avoid most of his attacks, you won't be able to dodge his heavy damage dealing punch. Even with the dash boots, you can't really dodge it. Considering the limited amount of extra lives the player will have at the start of this map, it is doubtful they'll even get this far, let alone be able to defeat Spark Mandrill. This sub-boss acts as a sort of gateway, and most players will die on this map enough that they won't beat it. This means most players will be tossed right back to the character select screen and choose to return to Spark Mandrill later. 2 words: hot lava. This makes it a lot more difficult to traverse this level, and it only goes away if you beat Chill Penguin stage first. The lava also prevents you from gaining access to the heart tank, and without the dash ability or the helmet, the player cannot get the Buster upgrade or E-tank hidden in the level. Flame Mammoth also proves to be a bit of a challenge, as the player once again has to put a lot of effort into avoiding attacks with a long range. The constantly moving conveyor belt keeps the player moving towards danger, in particular making it harder to avoid being backed into a corner. If the player fights defensively enough, they can manage to beat Flame Mammoth. So it is possible to complete his stage first, though without the rewards of the heart tank, E-tank, or Buster upgrade. As Boomer Kuwanger's level mostly focuses on verticality, there aren't many challenges presented by a lack of the dash boots. The greatest difficulty is found in avoiding the foes and spikes on the rising lift, as well as crossing the motion detectors. Without the dash boots, it is a lot harder to avoid getting hit. The only upgrade you cannot get is the heart tank, which needs the player to have completed the stage anyway. This communicates to the player that they'll need to go back and replay some of the levels in order to get everything, no matter what order they fight the robot masters in. Boomer Kuwanger himself is extremely difficult to face. You cannot break his pattern of phasing in and out with just the Mega Buster, and he becomes harder to avoid without the dash boots. This makes fighting defensively a pointless task as he always manages to close the distance. You need Launch Octopus's Horming Torpedo in order to keep your distance while relying on the missiles to find their mark. This removes the necessity to put yourself in harm's way in order to try and get a shot, which will inevitably lead to your demise. This is one of the few levels that grants access to an upgrade without any prerequisites. The player can avoid the sub-boss's vacuuming ability by jumping rather than dashing, and no additional tools are required to defeat the boat or sea serpent to gain access to the heart tank. While the game throws a lot of large foes and obstacles your way, the stage itself is nothing more than a decently challenging first level. Launch Octopus, on the other hand, is a major pain in the ass. It's easier to get sucked into his whirlpool and have your health absorbed, and his torpedoes are all over the place. Without the dash boots and a few more heart tanks, he proves to be a pretty difficult boss, and at that point you may as well have the rolling shield with you. This is another level that, sure, would be easier with the dash boots, but they aren't necessary. You can get the E-tank easily enough, and the heart tank more depends on how quickly you can defeat the Digger, a feat that is easier with Flame Mammoth's weapon. The real challenge is in defeating Armored Armadillo without Spark Mandrill's weapon. Armored Armadillo not only guards against most attacks, but they result in an attack of his own that spreads out across a wide area. This forces the player to try and dodge a slew of attacks that come close together while having very few moments of opportunity. Spark Mandrill's weapon not only removes that armor, but it halts most of Armored Armadillo's attacks and leaves him exposed. Now, I've mentioned Storm Eagle should be defeated second, but let's see what he's like as the first boss. The player will be unable to access the heart tank or the helmet, but they'll still manage to get the E-tank. Storm Eagle himself is one of the bosses designed to be possible to defeat with the Mega Buster, and in truth, Sting Chameleon's weapon doesn't really do much more than your Buster other than additional damage per shot. The strategy remains the same. Don't get knocked off the platform by the wind attacks and dodge Storm Eagle's dive so you don't get hurt, both of which are easier with the dash boots but don't require it. Now it's true there are downsides to doing Chill Penguin first. After all, if you do his stage before Flame Mammoth, you'll miss out on getting a heart tank. But you know what? Everything else just falls into place as being the first stage of the game. There are no sub-bosses to be seen here. There aren't any major set pieces. In fact, it's pretty much straightforward. I mean, you can't complete the level without getting the dash boots. The game literally prevents you from moving forward without them. This is also the only other Robot Master stage that features an armored mech aside from Stink Chameleons, pitting you against one enemy at a time and giving you a real feel for the extent of this machine's power. This leads up to fighting another enemy in an armored mech and gives you the power you lacked when you tackled Vile. This is a level that gets the player feeling empowered right after they just lost to Vile. It gives you a new ability right off the bat and drops you in a mech all before even pitting you against Chill Penguin himself. This is vital after the introduction stage has just told you the whole goal of the game is to get stronger, and in Chill Penguin stage that is just what you start to do. Note that this is possibly the only boss whose pattern can be broken with a default Mega Buster. If you hit him while he's in the air, then he'll be knocked back into the ground. The only time he is invincible is when he's about to slide across the ground, an attack easily avoided. His Frost Breath also has limited range, and chances are, even if you get trapped in it, you'll be safe after breaking out. His most lethal attacks rely on him leaping into the air, and as long as the player stays close to the wall or has room to dodge, then these attacks are easily avoided. I'd go so far as to say Chill Penguin is the easiest of the Robot Masters to defeat. Now let's rewind and look at who could most likely be defeated without any armor or heart upgrades. Flame Mammoth, Storm Eagle, and Chill Penguin. If the player chooses Storm Eagle first, they miss out on the heart tank and helmet, but they have the weapon Flame Mammoth is weak to and an E-tank. However, going to Flame Mammoth stage, you won't be able to get the Heart Tank, E-Tank, or Mega Buster upgrade. You'll just get the fire weapon that Chill Penguin is weak to. Now let's say you skip Storm Eagle and start with Flame Mammoth first. You'll have a bit of a harder time defeating Flame Mammoth without the Tornado, but when you get to Chill Penguin stage, you'll be able to get that Heart Tank the first time through. Problem is that this is really the hardest way to go about it. You'll miss out on multiple upgrades, and Flame Mammoth stage is going to be harder if you haven't beaten Chill Penguin first. Now let's say you want to tackle the Robot Masters based on weakness, and you decide to start with Chill Penguin. This will result in the player defeating Flame Mammoth last, and leaves the Mega Buster as the final upgrade. However, this also means you have to return to Stink Chameleon stage in order to get the final Hard Tank. As long as you start with Chill Penguin and go in order of weakness, you will have to return to Boomer Quanger stage for the Heart Tank, Spark Mandrills for the E-Tank, and Chill Penguins for another Heart Tank, no matter what. But if you go to Storm Eagle stage second, then you will not have to go back to Stink Chameleon stage in order to get the Heart Tank. You'll be able to get it the first time through. I would also insist that avoiding the jolts of electricity in Spark Mandrill stage is more difficult than having to deal with the power blinking in and out if you defeat Storm Eagle beforehand. Storm Eagle and Flame Mammoth are also the only Robot Masters that have all three types of upgrades, be it Armor, Heart, or E-Tank, that will provide a significant advantage throughout the game. Saving them for last means being handicapped for 5 other Robot Masters. The best solution is for the player to defeat Chill Penguin first, then to defeat Storm Eagle and Flame Mammoth to get 3 out of 4 armor upgrades while maximizing your health and reserves as soon as possible. When the player follows this path, the rest of the game is a lot easier, much easier than any of the preceding Mega Man games on the NES. This is not unintentional. If you defeat the enemies in order of weakness, and there is no way you'd see the environmental change to Flame Mammoth unless you start with Chill Penguin. Even if you start with Chill Penguin, you won't see the environmental change to Spark Mandrill unless you go out of order and defeat Storm Eagle first. Storm Eagle is just as easy or difficult with a Mega Buster as with the Chameleon Sting, so there's no need to wait until you have his weak point. May as well grab the upgrades as soon as possible and then tackle Flame Mammoth. The game relies on the player to learn this information through trial, error, and experimentation. Capcom did not believe their players were stupid. They expected their players to approach Mega Man X in the same way they'd approach any Mega Man at first. It was through small and subtle changes that the player would learn not only which Robot Master was weak to what weapon, but also which Robot Master to start with and what tools would unlock abilities the most efficiently. This is not only how they turned a 2-hour game into a long, replayable endeavor, this is how they could encourage players to communicate with each other and learn new strategies. They made a game that changes based on the player's approach via the environment and basic use of the mechanics. It teaches players how to best approach Mega Man X and then rewards them not only with greater power-ups, but easier levels and greater access to more rewards. This is what makes Mega Man X so elegant in its design. Most players won't realize that it is trying to gently nudge them into doing things a certain way, and at first will just seem as difficult as any previous Mega Man. However, through a combination of upgrades and changes to the environment, the player will begin to have an easier time. Due to the repetition, much of this will be attributed to skill, but it is also because the game is designed to provide gateways to completion that the player can only surpass under certain conditions or great struggle. A good game keeps the price of failure low and rewards for success substantial. The levels in Mega Man X are short, just as the game is, and makes it easy to come back to even after losing a fight. By following the breadcrumbs of rewards, a player will come to find failure less often and thus be empowered. This is why Mega Man X is, to me at least, the best in the series. It doesn't rely on the obstacles of older games and is thus more accessible to new players. Experimentation is rewarded and there is more to see around every corner. It is one of the few penultimate games that captures all the right design ideas so perfectly that the player won't even notice a single one. Games aren't supposed to be immersive, they are supposed to be engrossing, engaging. You'll never believe you're in the world of Mega Man X, but you won't care because it has its hooks in you, and those are some delightful feeling hooks.